Good evening, and welcome to tonight's meeting of the Commonwealth Club. I get to tell you that you can find the Commonwealth Club on the internet at commonwealthclub.org, see the club's videos on YouTube, and catch up with the club on Facebook and Twitter. I also want to prominently display Eve's book right here. Okay. This program is part of the Commonwealth Club's Good Lit series, underwritten by the Bernard Osher Foundation. I'm Lauren Schiller, the host of Inflection Point from KALW, which is an independent production about how women rise up, social change, and the quest for equality, and your moderator for tonight. I am now pleased to introduce today's distinguished guest, very distinguished, Eve Ensler, Tony Award-winning playwright of the Vagina Monologues and author of the new book, The Apology. Eve's theatrical career took off when she wrote the Vagina Monologues. Who has seen the Vagina Monologues? More than once? Okay. A work of such originality and power that it ran for over 10 years and has been translated into 48 languages and performed in more than 140 countries. Who's heard it in more than one language or seen it in more than one language? Look at this. Eve also founded V-Day, a global platform to end violence against women and girls, and she founded 1 Billion Rising. Half a billion of whom are in the room right now. The largest global mass action to end gender-based violence in over 200 countries. Eve's latest book, The Apology, is a powerful and personal, life-changing examination of abuse and atonement, and it is already a bestseller. Her book is a raw reckoning with a traumatic and unresolved past, which played an important role in Eve's artistic and political activist careers. It also shows other survivors of abuse how they may finally envision their own freedom from the past. Welcome, Eve.
Thank you.
We will be taking questions on cards, so you will either have cards or they will be passed to you. If you have questions, write them down and they'll bring them up to the stage. So this is going to be an interesting evening because we're going to talk, but then we're also going to hear some stuff from above. So let's start, Eve. Tell us a bit about why you wrote this book.
Well, first of all, hi, San Francisco. I love you, and I'm so happy to be back. Yay! And I just want to say how thrilled I am to be with Lauren. I love her show. I love what she's doing, and I love that we're doing this together. So thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Thank you.
Really wonderful. Why did I write this book? I've been in so many cities in so many days. My mind is just like... well, I think there were a combination of factors why I wrote this book. One, I was sexually abused by my father from the time I was 5 until the time I was 10. And after that, he began to physically abuse me in kind of horrendous and scary ways, almost murdering me a couple of times. And I think all my childhood, I dreamed that my father would apologize to me. I sort of thought that moment will come. I actually wrote him apology letters because I was always wrong and always bad, and it was always expected of me. But I think there was also a part of me that thought if I wrote him enough apology letters, he'd get the idea and he'd write one back. And then he died. And so he's been dead for 31 years. But still, the yearning for the apology has always been there. So that's one piece of it. The second piece is that having been an organizer and an activist for 21 years, my whole life really, in the movement to end violence against all women and girls, I've watched women tell her stories, break the silence, call men out, bravely tell our hearts and souls and risk humiliation, risk attack. And in all that time, I have never heard a man apologize publicly, authentically, deeply for what he's done. And in all the recent iteration of the Me Too movement, I have never heard a man publicly, authentically, deeply apologize. So I started to think, why is that? And then I started to ask people, have you ever heard a man? It's sort of the way I started the Vagina Monologues, tell me about your vagina. I would say to, women, have you ever heard a man? And then nobody could answer one instance of that. And then I started thinking, 16,000 years of patriarchy, have we ever heard a man in recorded history, that we could read a public apology? And no one could point to one. So I suddenly realized that this might be fundamental to why we're still where we are, and that maybe I could actually write my father's apology and say the words and create the words that I needed to hear in order to get free. And I embarked on this process, which was grueling, painful, revelatory, and ultimately profoundly liberating. So that's the kind of genesis of it.
Thank you. Well, so the book is written as your father writing to you. And we have readings from the Audible edition of The Apology, which are performed by Eduardo Ballerini, who channels you channeling your father. And we're going to play a couple of excerpts from the beginning of the book. So if we could hear reading 1 and reading 2, please.
How very strange to be writing you. Am I writing to you from the grave? Or the past? Or the future? Am I writing as you? Or as you would like me to be? Or as I really am beneath my own limited understanding? And does it matter? Am I writing in a language I never spoke or understood, which you have created inside both of our minds to bridge the gaps, the failures to connect? Maybe I am writing as I truly am, as you have freed me by your witness. Or I'm not writing this at all, but simply being used as a vehicle to fulfill your own needs and version of things. You always wrote me letters. I found that peculiar and strangely moving. We lived in the same house, but you were writing to me, your little girl handwriting attempting straight lines, but wandering all over the page. It was as if you were trying to make contact with some aspect of me, a part you could not find in the heated moments of our conflict, as if you were trying through poetry to appeal to a secret self that I had once made available to you. Usually you wrote apology letters. So fitting that you would now want an apology letter from me. You were always apologizing, begging for forgiveness. I had reduced you to a daily degrading mantra of, "I'm sorry."
How did it feel to hear that?
Well, the first time I heard
Yeah.
a man read this, it was really weird and eerie, and but it was also just like I was interviewed by this lovely man, Ron Charles, at the Washington Post, and he asked me if this was going to become a theater piece, which I'm really happy to say that it is, and I said I think. I said, I think women would pay a lot of money to come hear a man make an apology, and the truth of the matter is, like, every time I hear it, I feel more and more released, because there's something about the concretization. There's something about an apology that is the alchemy of that, which I'll talk about more later, that is so releasing of so much in our bodies because we never hear it. And as weird as it sounds and as eerie as it just feels like, oh, okay. What I knew to be true all along was true all along, and now we're having a dialogue and we're going on a journey where that's going to get told,
Yeah. What were you looking for? I mean, is it even possible to put your finger on the characteristics that you were looking for in the delivery of the apology?
If you mean from the man?
Yeah.
Well, I think writing this book was such a very strange experience, and I think I have to go back to that.
Yes, let's do that.
Because I was in the Congo, and for me, everything amazing happens in the Congo, because it's one of the most mystical, spiritual places I've ever been. But it's a place that lives in the heart of ambiguity. It's been more colonized. There's been more racism, there's been more war, there's been more raping and of people, of pillaging of resources, of stealing of land. And yet at the same time, it's the most beautiful country. The people are the most beautiful people. There's a life force and spirit there that is just like nothing I've ever experienced. And so whenever I'm there, I feel like I'm in the center of that incredible dynamic ambiguity and wisdom and churning. And I was at City of Joy in late summer, and I was listening to women tell their stories and the experiences they were going through, and that's when I realized this thing about apologies. And the minute I made this decision that I was going to write this letter from my father to me. And I called my agent from Congo like at 12 o'clock at night, and she was like, "You have to do this book. I know this is what you have to do." You know, she's the most amazing woman. I know you all know who Charlotte Chidi is. She's like been the greatest feminist, and she's supported some of the greatest writers from Audre Lorde to, and anyway, so I came back, and when I opened the portal, when I just invited my father to come in, it was as if I literally went into some trance state, and he went into me, and I went into him. And except for a few days, for 4 solid months, morning, noon, and night, I was in there. And I don't really know who wrote this book. Do you know? I don't know if it was me or my father or me and my father or where we live or where we meet. Because what I really discovered, and I think all survivors know this, is that our perpetrators, when they rape us or beat us or hurt us or demean us or harass us, they enter us. They become embedded in us. And for my whole life, I was in dialogue with that father inside me. As a matter of fact, I've lived within his paradigm. I have been a perpetual victim to his abuser my whole life. That's framed my life. That paradigm has been the story of my life. And so it was not hard to access my father because he's always been there. And I think also for those of us who've been abused, particularly if it's a family member and it happens over and over, you know your abuser some ways better than yourself. You know their footsteps, you know the sound of their voice. It indicates whether they've had 1 or 2 drinks or if they're in a bad mood or a good mood. You learn to read every little aspect of them in order to learn how to pretend to protect yourself, right? And so I think once I began to find my father's voice, he took over in a way. It was like that thing where somebody's writing, you're moving your hand, you know? And I have to tell you, a lot of his vocabulary I don't know. I think his voice is much more formal and authorial, and it's not my voice, it's his voice. And in that sense, I think looking at actors and thinking who should read this, I know that the person has to be charming and seductive and scary and intimidating and authorial and someone you're drawn to and terrified at the same time. You know, and I think Eduardo, I listened to a bunch of people before I heard Eduardo, and then I heard him and I thought, he gets it, you know. And he had a really profound experience doing it. He broke down sobbing in the middle of it, like it just because he has 2 daughters. So that was a really interesting thing, what he went through doing the audio.
Yeah, I was wondering if he realized what he was getting himself into.
I think he did because he had read, I don't think he realized the depth of it
Yeah.
until he started to do it.
Yeah. Well, and as you take this out to become a performance, that's going to be another interesting experience
Yes.
for everyone involved. Well, let's zoom out for a few minutes and talk about what you referenced when you talked about why you wrote this book, which is what the state of apologies is between men and women. We don't have a culture of apology unless you're a woman, in which case you over-apologize. You apologize for yourself and everyone around you, right?
And existing.
And existing, right? Just taking up a little bit of space. So, and in the Me Too movement, we heard thousands and thousands of stories that you already knew were out there. I mean, you've been living in this world and catching these stories, but we heard hardly any apologies. And in fact, on, Brett Kavanaugh, who refused to apologize and talked about beer.
Right.
So it seems like we need to understand, or maybe they need to understand, what is an apology, that there's not necessarily a template for it.
Well, I just want to say, I think I learned so much about what an apology is writing this book. I learned about the anatomy of an apology and the tenets of an apology. And I want to say a couple of things. I think an apology is a humbling. It's making yourself vulnerable. It's an equalizer. I think it's everything about an apology is in the details. The liberation of the victim or the survivor is in the details. It's not, I'm sorry I sexually abused you, or I'm sorry I hurt you, or I'm sorry if you feel bad. It's here's exactly what I did, and here was my intention behind what I did. And I think we live in a country that has diabolical amnesia. Diabolical amnesia. We don't remember anything. We don't remember our origins, the genocide against the indigenous whose land we stand on. We don't remember the 400 years of slavery annihilated hundreds and thousands of people, and then moving into Jim Crow and then moving into mass incarceration. We don't remember our own families. The events that are happening in front of us as they're happening, we're erasing them. And we don't remember yesterday's news. It's already gone. So I think what I really learned is that an apology is the antidote to amnesia. It actually makes what occurred, it makes it real. It did occur. I think of the comfort women who I've had the honor to know in the Philippines, but there were comfort women throughout Asia that were taken by the Japanese government in World War II. And they were held in rape camps when some of them were in their teens and early 20s. Sometimes they were raped up to 50 times a day to serve those soldiers. The comfort women have been waiting 70 years for an apology from the Japanese government. 70 years. Most of them have died. Many of them are infirmed. There's only a few left. All they wanted was the Japanese government to say that what happened did happen. We're not crazy people. We know what we experienced in our bodies and beings that we've carried all these years. And I think an apology actually does that. It says what occurred did occur. The other piece that I really learned is that for a man to apologize, one has to go back in time and history and understand what made you do what you did. What happened in your life? What happened in your origins? What happened in your childhood? Nobody is born a pedophile. No one is born with a machete in their hand. Something happens to boys that makes them turn and become different kinds of beings in this world. And I think one of the most profound aspects of writing this book, and the most difficult, and I just want to say about this book, it's an offering. It's not a prescription. It's not a have to. There are many survivors who don't want an apology, will never want it, and that's all amazing and good. There's no must. I knew for me, I was at a point where I had vestiges left. I had anger left that was poisoning me. I was still living within my father's story, and I wanted to be living in a different story, and I wanted to see if I could get into that story. But I think one of the things that I discovered in going back into my father's story is like I began to unravel the why. And I think for all of us who've been abused, whether it's racial injustice, we are obsessed with the why. Why did my best friend drug me and date rape me? Why did the police shoot me because I'm a black person? Why did my father want to kill his oldest daughter? Why? And I think when you begin to go back, and I began to unravel, and my father began to tell me the story of his psychological, emotional evolution or de-evolution in his case, I was like, oh, I see the story. I see the story that led up to him becoming, and in that sense, it wasn't about me anymore. I saw it was about him. I saw it was on him. It was what had been done to him that led him to do those things, but it had nothing to do with me being a bad person or a slut or a jackass or a whore or any of the terrible things he ever called me. And it really released me by understanding that why. And then I think the last piece, or the second last piece, is being accountable. Being accountable. Once you've gone through that whole journey of self-interrogation and self-reflection, and you've spelled out the details of what you've done, and you've looked into your malintentions, then it's taking responsibility for that in a way that your victim or survivor feels satisfied and indicates that you've gone through a deep enough journey where you couldn't possibly do that to somebody else. To me, that's an apology. We teach prayer in school, right? We teach the devotion of prayer and the concentration of prayer. We teach the humbling of the petition, but we don't teach the practice of apology. We teach maybe, oh, I'm sorry, but that's not an apology. An apology is a deep, profound, spiritual, psychological, political act. And we live in a country that is so not about apologies. It's punitive, it's violent, it's punitive, it's violent, that's the cycle we're in. The apology is the practice that can break us out of that cycle.
Well, this is starting to sound like a movement. So you write in the book, in your father's words, that to be an apologist is to be a traitor to men. And I'm wondering, do you well, you've said already that you opened a portal and he came through you. But I still had the question, do you think that he really felt that, or do you think that he was using that as an excuse?
Well, I think when my father said that to me, and I really felt like he said it to me because I don't know how I would know that, he just basically said to me, to be an apologist is a traitor to men. Once one man apologizes and admits he knows that he's wrong, and he knew what he was doing was wrong, the whole story of patriarchy begins to crumble. And I really literally stopped in my tracks for the rest of that day. I was like, wow, this is a column. This is a major column of patriarchy, the apology. And I think what I really understood, there's a point in the book where my father he gets to move from limbo to hell. And in hell, he meets all the fathers. And he actually says to me at one point, I would rather spin in hell and be within the tribe of men than I would apologize, because at least within the tribe of men, I know my identity, I know my value, I have privilege, I have power. But to give this up, who would I be? And I think one of the things that patriarchy is so genius at is offering no alternatives, right? It's constantly dividing people and separating people with no doorways out. So I think, and I've said this my whole life, that the tyranny of patriarchy has been much, much more devastating to men than it has to women. We have our hearts intact. We have our spirits intact. I think what's happened to men, and I really learned this in this book, is again, I can just say a little bit about my father's childhood. My father was born like 12 years after the last child in his family. He was the mistake that became the miracle. He was the golden boy, the divine right of kings. He was going to bring the family to the promised land. And my father was adored. But adoration is not love. And I really want to make this distinction. We adore boys. And what that means is we have projected ideal images of who they're supposed to be that we project onto them, that they have to live up to, having very often nothing to do with who they really are. And so every time a boy experiences his tenderness or his vulnerability or his heart or his sorrow or his wonder, and that's not in keeping with that adoration, he's got to push it underground. And he's got to push it underground. And he's got to push it underground. And in my father's case, he pushed it so much underground that it eventually metastasized into another persona called the Shadow Man, who he talks about in the book. And that Shadow Man actually surfaced at my birth. Because what happened was, I was the first daughter, and my father was overwhelmed with the tenderness he did not know how to experience. He had been robbed of his own tenderness. He didn't know how to be tender to himself, and he didn't know how to be tender in the world. And so when I was born, he didn't know to sit with tenderness. I was saying last night, my granddaughter was in the audience. I look at my granddaughter sometime, and I'm filled with such overwhelming love for them. I don't know what to do. I sometimes just sit and cry. It's just so big, that love. And I know how to sit with that tenderness. Like, I just weep. But if you've never had the experience of having tenderness, you want to get rid of it. You want to smash it. You want to exploit it. You want to rape it. You want to conquer it. You want to dominate it. You want to make it go away. And I think that's what happened in my father's early years with me. I think he began adoring me and being overwhelmed by that. And then it became very perverse and sexual and weird. And I think part of what we have to look at is, why are we separating our boys from their hearts? Why are we creating idealized images of them, of who they're supposed to be, when they're actually just brilliant who they are? They're tender and they're funny and they're wise and they're full of sparkle. And if they want to wear pink, let them wear pink. And if they want to dress with fairy wings, let them dress with fairy wings. But we have all these ideas of what they're supposed to be. And so what we do is we separate them and we separate them and we separate them from their hearts, from their selves, from their feelings. And then we ask ourselves, why is this 18-year-old boy lying on top of a girl, raping her when she's screaming, no, no, no? Well, he's not feeling anything. He's not feeling what she's feeling because he's not feeling. He's been robbed of his feelings. So I think that really opened up a huge piece of compassion in me towards my father. Not to justify his behavior. I think there's a big difference between justification and explanation. But he explained it. And if we don't get underneath why men are doing what they're doing, if we don't get underneath this story, if we keep going at it, we are going to disappear as a human species. We are going to disappear. We will become extinct. So I think that's what that excavation taught me.
So you and I had a chance to talk almost exactly a year before the Me Too movement exploded. And I just want to give kudos to Eve for being a visionary always. And in this particular conversation, you said that we are at a tipping point for men to rise up and declare they're going to bring in a new idea of what manhood is and what it means to live in a world where women are safe and free. And I mean, I feel like with your publishing this book and getting your message out to as many people as you are in the way that you are manifesting that movement, and you are making it possible for that to start happening. I mean, it feels like the logical next step in where we are with women raising their voices and saying what happened to them, that men need to take their part and own that responsibility. And I was wondering if we could talk just a bit about, like you said, we can't erase our history. It took us a long time to get even here. Where we are in the chain of events that could lead us to this moment where this could actually work.
Well, I think the $10 million question is what will catalyze men to engage in this process, right? And I have to say, having been on this book tour now for 5 or 6 or 7 weeks, I can't remember at this point, I've been really moved by men. I've been moved by male journalists. I've been moved by men who've invited me on their shows. I've been moved by men in audiences. And I think we all feel this. We're at this moment in human civilization that either we're going to perish or we're going to break through to the next level of human consciousness. And I know I can only say that I don't believe in punishment. I was raised on punishment every day. I was punished every day of my life. It didn't educate me. It didn't transform me. It didn't make me a better person. It made me bitter. It made me defiant. It made me raging. It made me hateful. And I think if we look at our prison system, obviously it's a diabolical system, which is highly unjust in terms of the racist aspects of it and the economic injustice aspects of it. But prisons don't make people better. They harden people, and they erase people, and they exile people. And I think I guess I've always believed what Castro said, that we only need 10% of the people to have a revolution. We need 10% of the men to be brave now, and to come forward, and to begin the process of reckoning, and begin the process of speaking into and doing the deep work, asking themselves why they've done, why they continue to do the things they do. Not expecting attack and to be thrown away, but we have to open a pathway so that this process can occur. Because otherwise, we're really going to we're at a stalemate. And I was really moved to see that the NYPD apologized for Stonewall. I thought that was really profound. And I thought it's in the air, like something's beginning to shift. I've been seeing these little doorways of apologies beginning to open. But I don't know about you, but that was a very profound thing to hear a police officer say, we were wrong. We did something that was unjust, and we are taking responsibility for that. And I think, we have a website now called theapologybook.net where wonderful people have been writing about what is an apology and why is it important. And Farah Tanis did this beautiful, beautiful guide for how to do apologies. But we've also been inviting people to write in apologies, either to their victims or write apologies as their perpetrators to themselves. And we got our first apology, I'm happy to say. And it was a man. And I have to say, it was a real apology of a boy who had molested a 15-year-old when he was 21 years old. And in his letter, he took complete responsibility for what he had done on every level. I knew that you were younger, I used you, I manipulated you, I got you to believe and trust me, but I took advantage of that. He went down, boom, boom. And I have to say, just reading that letter, other things got released in me. Because it's a communal process. When one person apologizes, you begin to feel what's been holding in you all these years. You begin to feel the tentacles of that releasing. And I just think what I'm hoping, what I'm dreaming, is that men will now feel emboldened to come forward. And I just want to say this. People keep saying it's so hard for men to come forward. We have been doing this work for 70 years, women. Starting with the African American women who came forward initially to fight off white rapists and put their souls on the line and risk all kinds of violence. We have put ourselves on the line. We have told our stories. We have risked shame. We've been under attack. We only have to look to Anita Hill or Christine Blasey Ford. We have done that scary work, and we're still standing. And men can now do that scary work. And we have to obviously help create a pathway, but there have to be the brave men who are willing to say, all right, I'm going to come forward and do that. And what's the payoff? The payoff is you don't get out of this world. You don't get out of this world having done something violent and evil and mean without it contaminating your soul forever. You don't. And you're holding it in your body, in your being, whether you're conscious of it or not, and it's impacting everything you do every day of your life. So the payoff is you get free. You get free. And I think the point of existence is to get free. So I hope there will be a cadre of men who step by step by step begin to come forward and break their silence and begin to tell their stories and to begin to reckon and apologize in the way that women need to hear.
So not everyone's ready to forgive, right? So what would you say to women who they're not quite in the place where they even want the apology? Is it possible for men to still go through the process even if there's not someone there that is ready to forgive them?
Well, I don't think the apology should be based on forgiveness. I don't even know if I know what forgiveness is, and I'm just going to be honest. The words always kind of creep me out, and I'll just say why. I feel that it always has religious overtones, and it always feels mandated, like it's an obligation.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to do that. I don't think the onus is ever on the victim to forgive. I don't. But what I do believe in is the alchemy of an apology. I think when someone sits and looks at you across the table, and you are clear that they have given you a detailed accounting of what they've done, where they've gone into their souls and they've investigated why they've done it, what led them to do it, where they've gone through every detail of unveiling their intentions and made amends, something actually happens in your body, in your mind, in your spirit. You can feel the tentacles of rancor and betrayal and hate. All of it just begins to go bing, 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 bing. If that's forgiveness, I'm all for forgiveness. If that's what forgiveness feels like. I don't think anyone has to forgive. I sometimes hear bad therapists telling survivors, forgive now and get over it. I just think that's deadly. It's deadly. That's not something that can happen. Or that's not my experience of what can happen. What happens is you go through a process, and I think if you can't get an apology from your perpetrator, and in many cases women can't, I would highly recommend doing this exercise. Not alone. You should do it with a counselor or a therapist or a clergy or a friend. But I will tell you something. We hold these perpetrators inside of us. And when we write letters from them to ourselves, we can move how they live inside us. So, for example, my father was here for years and years and years, monster lodged here. And I was in this dynamic with him where I was victim to his perpetrator forever. Everything I do was about, you see, I'm not the stupid person you thought I was, proving to him, always in relationship to that. And that was his story, right? In writing this apology, I moved him from monster to apologist. I moved him from terrifying entity to broken, tragic, wounded boy. And in doing that, he lost power over me. He lost agency over me. And I think at City of Joy, a month ago, Christine decided she would try this exercise out. City of Joy is a sanctuary for healing and a revolutionary center in the Congo. That V-Day, it's a V-Day project, and it's run by Christine Schuller-Describer, and it's just the most beautiful project where 90 women come for 6 months to be trained, to be healed, to be supported, who have suffered very, very bad sexual trauma. And she introduced this exercise, and she said, it's unbelievable what started to happen. And she came into her office last week, and there were piles of letters. Women had been up all night writing letters from their perpetrators to themselves, and they were feeling so free, and they were feeling... So I think it has the potential to liberate in all kinds of ways.
Yeah. Well, it does seem like, you said you can feel it in the air. It does seem like, there's the restorative justice movement, and there are now just all these fresh ways of looking at how to deal with the past in a way that is respectful and acknowledging of what really did happen and not brushing it over. So in your book, you talked about the details too. You go into wrenching detail. He writes that he would enumerate what you did wrong every week or every day and have his secretary type it up on his letterhead and then present it to you so that you would have to apologize for every item on the list. Right? I mean,
no, but it was even weirder than that. I mean, he would type up all the things I had done wrong on a memo from the desk of Arthur S. Ensler, and it would be typed up. And then I was 16. He had a ping pong paddle, and he would take down my underpants and bend me over his bed. And for everything I would done wrong, he would whack me with the ping pong paddle. So there was a whole kind of sadistic thing built into the "I'm sorry" bit, and I think it's why I think it's why I despise torture so much, why I despise punishment so much, because I think something I really learned as a child, the only way to survive that is to separate from yourself. The only way to survive that kind of ongoing violence is to leave your body. I can remember hearing him call me down and knowing I was going into a brutal session, and I would stand in front of the mirror and I would look at myself and I would say, "You're going to go away now. You're not going to feel anything. You're going to disappear. You're not going to go into this. You stay here, and the rest of you will go downstairs." And then I would go downstairs, and he'd throw me against walls, or he'd punch me, and I wouldn't feel a thing. I wouldn't feel a thing. And that prepared me to live a life where I would put myself in constant danger and not feel a thing, right? And so that's what we do when we brutalize people. We prepare them and either to become brutalizers. And in the case of men who feel like they have power in the world, that's where they go. In the case of some women who feel like they finally can't bear it anymore, they act out and they have violence. But for a lot of us, it's just about separating from ourselves and becoming kind of open to the violent mercy of the world, because you don't feel and protect yourself from the danger that's around you.
What's so interesting, tragic, I'm not sure the right adjective about that, is that that's the same way that you talked about your father having this alternate self also. Do we want to do another reading?
Sure.
Okay, can we play reading? Actually, let me set it up for a second. So this goes into the details. So trigger moment, just prepare yourself.
This will be intense, so everybody just prepare a little bit.
Reading 4, please, and 5.
I would find myself in your room at some twilight hour. I only felt alive between the daylight and darkness, in that crepuscular realm where dream and memory are indecipherable. That's how I controlled you. Those aphotic hours where others in the house were lost in sleep and you were in a trance, separated from your body. I would find myself sitting on your bed, somehow carried there by shadow men. You would pretend to be asleep, as if what was happening was not happening. You desperately wanted it and me to go away. I didn't go away. I never spoke, never uttered a sound. The silence was my power. Words would break the spell, make it real and ugly and what it was. What kind of bastard have I been? What kind of destruction have I wrought? I have lied, and lied to myself and you. I cursed your future of love. At 5, I took your body. You didn't give it to me. I contaminated your sweetness. I ripped the protective golden gates from your garden. I betrayed your trust. I rearranged your sexual chemistry and the basis of your desire. Wrongness and excitement were forever fused together. I made my stain. I left my stinking mark. I infected you. By invading and overwhelming your body, I killed your yearning so early. You did not and could not give me permission. There was no consent. You did not seduce me with your crinoline petticoats. You were simply being an adorable child. I overstimulated your 5-year-old body and planted the seeds of intensity and thrill. You would push yourself too far, take heroin, jump off bridges, drive 100 miles an hour. I robbed you of the ordinary. I destroyed your notion of family. I forced you to betray your mother. You lived in perpetual self-hatred and guilt. I created hierarchy, distrust, and violent competition between you and your siblings. None of you would recover from this. I robbed you of agency over your body. You didn't make any decisions. You didn't say yes. That was my projection in order to satisfy my needs. You were 5 years old. I was 52. You had no sovereignty. I exploited and abused you. I took your body. It was no longer yours. I rendered you passive. You compulsively gave it to whoever wanted it because I taught you should. I forced you out of your body, and because you were dislocated and numb, you were unable to protect yourself. I compromised your safety and ability to defend yourself. I made it so that rape became what turned you on. I eviscerated your necessary boundaries so you never knew what was yours and when to say no or how to say stop. I tore the delicate walls of your vagina and made it vulnerable to disease and infection. Your body didn't and couldn't say yes. This was a convenient lie I told myself. You didn't know it was sex. I took what I needed by convincing myself you needed it too. I exploited your adoration. I forced you into secrecy, to lie to your mother, to develop a dual life. This split you in two. I made you feel like a whore. I made you feel you were never worthy of legitimate love. I made intimacy claustrophobic. I left my poison in you. I destroyed your memory by making you want to forget everything. This impacted your intelligence and ability to contain facts and take tests. I stole your innocence. I dimmed your life force and made you feel your sexuality was the cause of bad things. I used your being and body to serve myself. I did all this.
Thank you for letting us share that. There are a couple questions have come in asking about your mom and where she was when all this was happening. Do you want to talk about that?
I think my mother and I went through a really long journey after I confronted her. But I think my mother was of a generation where they didn't believe they were equal to men. They believed that men had the power. My father was like a CEO, and my mother was at best his executive assistant, And I often felt like he had 4 children, and she was one of them. She was a woman who had been very poor, had grown up in the Midwest, and my father was her way out of that poverty. And I think by the time the abuse started, she had 3 children, and she had no economic security. She had no economic wherewithal. She had no job. She had no prospects. And when I confronted my mother, which was probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, to just sit and face my mother and say what my father had done to me, of course, she knew. It was very odd because at the end of it, she said, "Well, I know your father almost murdered you. I was there for all the times he did that when he beat you and everything, but I didn't know about the sexual stuff." As if the beatings were all fine. It was just a weird little moment. But later, she repented for that. But it was just like a weird. But I think my mother said to me months after I confronted her, she called me up at 4:00 in the morning, and she was hysterical one night, and she said, "I realize I sacrificed you. I sacrificed you. I could not bear the idea of being poor again. And I really let your father do what he wanted to you to keep my security." And as devastating as that was, I knew it was true. And so it was the beginning of my mother making amends to me because she told me the truth. And we went through a very long journey before she died. And I feel like every day, she once said to me something really startling, and it showed me the power of perpetrators over our lifetime, not just this lifetime, but many, many lifetimes. She said to me, "What if I meet your father in the next life, and he's mad at me that I believed you?" And to me, that was the most shuddering thing she ever said to me.
Wow.
Because he even had power in death over her. And I don't know why, I just remembered that. It just makes me so sad. Because I don't think we can underestimate ever what violence does to us. How deeply it goes in not just to the cellular makeup of our physical bodies, but into the spiritual DNA of not only this story, but our ancestral story. It just goes on and on into generation, because fear is so powerful. It's so powerful. And so I think with my mother, because she just kept going back at it, to try to go deeper into it, to explain and understand why she had done before she died. When she died, we were in a beautiful place, and I was able to really let her go. And she was I feel like she left this world in a really good place.
Wow. Who was the first person that you ever told that this was happening? Was it your mom?
No.
No.
No, by no means. No, it was the violence. The first time I ever talked about it, I was drunk with my two roommates, and everyone was laughing and talking about things, and I was when you grow up in a violent situation, you have no context to understand that that's weird or abnormal, so you just think everybody's family does that. So I had these two fabulous roommates, and I was making a joke, and I went, and then my father said to my mother, "Chris, get the kitchen knife." And everyone paused and said, "What?" And I said, "Yeah, he told my mother to get the kitchen knife so he could stab me." And they were like, "That is not normal.
That's not okay.
That is not okay." And it was the first time anyone reflected back to me, right, that I had grown up in a very seriously damaged situation. And I think it wasn't until later when I went into therapy that I began to, because for many, many, many years, I had no memory of the first 10 years of my life. Absolutely no memory. It was just blotto. Like I began at 10. And then as I began to melt, and my numbness began to melt over time, because I was highly anesthetized. I was a raging alcoholic and a drug addict. I just anesthetized. And so it took a process of numbing and coming out of numbing and melting till I began to feel and then began to remember,
So how did you break the cycle of abusing yourself, basically? I mean, through drugs and alcohol. How did you?
With
put
the
an
help
end to
of
that?
really amazing people. I mean, somebody said the other night, like, what are the things that saved you, right? And I think there were two things that saved me. One was imagination and the ability to imagine another world where I was going and people who would be coming. And the other was just amazingly kind people who intervened on my behalf throughout my life. And I don't think we can underestimate how one person's kindness towards somebody can absolutely radicalize their life, particularly when you've come from total deprivation. Do you know? And I think I was in the 12-step programs for a long time, and when I came into the 12-step programs, there was like no women, and people were so kind to me. They were just so kind to me, and it was that, believing people could see me before I could see myself, and they held a vision of me that I could live into, and I think it's why I believe. I don't know, when I hit rock bottom as an alcoholic, and it was a really bad scene, and I almost died, and I got on my hands and knees in a parking lot in Puerto Rico, and I just said, I remember this like it was yesterday. I was 23 years old. I said, if you don't let me go crazy or die, I promise you, if you help me get better, I will go back for the others. I swear to God. And you know what? That was the best vow I ever made, because I think when you give people what you want the most, you heal the broken part inside you. It's always going out to help people that you heal yourself, because it's too hard in here,
Yeah. So when did you feel like you kind of put yourself back together, that the two parts of you were reunited into finding yourself?
I think it's like a gradual process, It didn't. I think bits of you come in. I remember when I was performing the vagina monologues, and I had been living way outside my vagina for many, many years, like looking down at it. I was performing it for months and months, and one night I just landed in my vagina. I was like, oh my God, I'm in my vagina. Like I literally went woof. And like, okay, so that I came back in there. And then like, and then I was in, and then like little pieces, then one day you come back into your heart, and one day you come back, it's like, it's a process of return, right? It's a process of coming back in. And it doesn't happen overnight. But if you're steady at it and you keep working at it and if you want it, if you want to live in the body of the world, if you want to live in your body and in the body of the earth, if that's your desire, it will happen. I think the worst thing they tell rape survivors and survivors of violence is that you're broken forever. That's the second rape. And it's just not true. It's just not true. We can come back in. We can be more amazing because we've gone through all that. And we can be more strong and more vital and more energized after. And I think we have to get out of this idea that we're forever locked into that story, their story. We have to create our story now. Our story is not about victims and perpetrators. Our story is about this,
And that comes back to, well, you had a conversation with Kimberly Crenshaw a week or so ago, and she called it you have to have radical empathy. I mean, radical, like at its root, empathy to be able, it feels like, to be able to break out of that, because you have to be able to hold what happened to you and know that it was real, and also to be able to start to have an understanding of where it came from.
Totally. And I think part of it is checking out with yourself. Like, I feel like I would have empathy for this person and this person, but I had conditional empathy, right? There were the people I just didn't have empathy for, like men, right? And this book really changed that. But I want to tell you this one little story, because this was the day when I began to understand how empathy can't be conditional. I was working at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility, and I was running groups. And I had this group of amazing long-term inmates who were all there for violent crimes, mainly murders. And I had one session with these women. I fell completely in love with all of them except for one. And this woman gave me the super creeps, and I didn't like her. And everything about her creeped me out. And I had no compassion for her and no empathy for her. And everybody else would tell their and so we were going around every week, and each week it was like you tell one story from 1 to 9 that would really evidence what you went through at that period. So we'd go around the circle. And the second session, that woman came in and she sat down next to me, and I was like, oh God. Like, I had such a creepy feeling about this woman, I can't tell you. And so all the women around, and I want to tell you that just about every woman in that circle who had been radically sexually abused, radically, horribly abused as children, right? So we got to her, and I was actually like kind of leaning like this, like away from her. And she started to tell her story. And she told her story. And I can cry again hearing this story. And she said that when she was a child, her mother and her stepfather rented her out as a sex toy. And they let all the people, they had all these clients that would use her basically as a baby dildo, and they would do everything to her, and they would tie her to beds, and they would just horrible things. And then her mother died, and her stepfather married her. And he then turned her into his little pimp, where she would go out and she would find children in the neighborhood and bring them in so they could abuse them. And one of the children died, and she came to prison. And when she was in prison, she had no idea why she was there, because she had never lived in any other moral universe. She had nothing to compare it to. She didn't understand that what had happened to her was bad, because that was all that she knew. And it took her 5 years in prison to understand it, and then she started to cut herself to try to kill herself. And she actually said in the group, "Never let me out of prison." And I just started to sob. And I realized I had made a story up about this woman because of her pockmarked skin and the way she looked and her vibration. And I had written her off. I had written her off, and I made a contract with myself that after that day, I would just assume that any person I sat next to was traumatized and had been through something really terrible. And if it wasn't first, it wasn't primary, it was secondary, or they were witness to it, and that everybody we're sitting next to is traumatized. Some more than others, some have more privileged in their trauma, but we're all suffering. And we're suffering so much in this country, and I'm sorry I'm crying, but I've just been around this country for the last days and days. I feel like I've fallen into the center of the wound. We are so hurting in this country. We are so exiled, we're so lonely, we're so separated, we're so divided. And if we're going to go on, we have to reach out and feel each other, and let each other into ourselves, and take everybody in so that we feel each other and we understand we're not alone in this, and we're in the same struggle to evolve as human beings and to become free from our suffering. Sorry. It's been a lot of stories,
Thank you. Yeah, and I mean, based on this whole conversation, that applies to women and men and all genders, everything in between.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about how others might use this approach. I mean, you've set up a website. You're going to do a play. You said that it's an offering, not a prescription. Maybe not everyone's going to want to do it. But you're starting to see results, and I mean, I feel like you're creating a model for how the world can be by doing this.
Well, I think there's so many people doing such amazing work right now with restorative justice and really beginning to understand that prisons are not the answer. And that's the metaphor. Like, we have to get out of prisons, just even cages. The idea that we harden things rather than releasing things and moving through things. And what I hope is that, first of all, I hope that men will be inspired on their own to begin to come forward, to start to work with clergy, with counselors, to go through a process where they look at their behavior, where they look at what they've done, where they begin to write their apologies and write in and go through a process. And, Kimberly Crenshaw and I were talking, like, how does this apply to justice? Maybe there becomes a way where prosecutors say to victims, what do you want? Do you want your perpetrator in prison, or do you want an apology process? Do you want to see your perpetrator go through a year or two where they do massive therapy, massive work on themselves, spiritual work, where they go through something, and at the end we have panels in communities of advocates and social justice people and therapists who sit and listen to the perpetrator make an apology to the victim. And if the victim accepts it, then the panel and the victim determine whether that person has done the work or they have to go back and do more work. But we have ways out of this. So we're not freezing people forever in their badness and in their mistakes, because we're all prisoners to racist patriarchy. It's brought us all up. And if we're all we have to admit to that. Like, the system has created all of us. So what we need is the men now to catalyze this and say, I'm coming forward to break out of the system.
Yeah. I sense more applause. So we do have some audience questions.
Okay.
Try and let's see. This is about your father. Did your father express fear before his death, as if he perhaps sensed he was headed for limbo until he became accountable for his abuse of you?
No. As a matter of fact, he never let me know he was dying. And a few days before he died, he came out of his, drugged stupor to tell my mother to take me out of his will. And he said to her, if I ever told her anything, it was a lie because I was a liar. And it's really interesting, when I confronted my mother, she said if he hadn't said that to her, she wouldn't have believed me. But because he was so worried about it coming out, he came out of a morphine stupor to say it to her. So I think that's really profound.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you think that was the one and only time he ever even would have alluded to it in his whole life?
Well, I think so much about my father after he had kind of destroyed me through the sexual abuse. I was the walking reminder of that I cut off all my hair. I was always belligerent. I was always like depressed. I was kind of a pathetic child after that. And I think I was evidence of what he had done. So he wanted to destroy the evidence, and he wanted to destroy me. And I think one of the things I learned writing this book is what perpetrators do to delegitimize all the people who know the truth. This is exactly what our predator-in-chief has done over these last few years, which is constantly delegitimize different groups to make them feel like they are nothing and no one. And he does it through all these things so that there's nobody who can call him who's legitimate on what he's doing. It's also making himself the victim, which is what perpetrators are genius at. Like, suddenly it's all a witch hunt and we're all after him. And that's always was my father's. Look what you've made me do to you. I had to beat you almost to death because of what you did. I'm the victim here. It's that turning things around.
Here's another audience question. And we've been speaking mostly of men as abusers. So you speak of boys being robbed of certain feelings and emotions, but the same happens to women. We were raised not being allowed to be angry, spirited, or even speak when not spoken to.
Yep.
Yet women did not turn into abusers. What explains the difference?
It's a good question. I think my thought about that is, and maybe I'm wrong about this, is that we may not have allowed to express our anger, but we were allowed to have our hearts. We were allowed to feel. We were allowed to cry. We were allowed to be connected to ourselves. And I can't say what the impact of testosterone versus estrogen. I have no idea. But I do know that even if we're not allowed to have our anger, and even if we have relationship. We have relationship. Like, who was I talking to the other day that they were just saying, like, they know so many men who aren't in deep relationships. They are alone. And part of when we remove people from their hearts and remove people from their tenderness, we remove them from community. We remove them from those deep relationships. So I know what saved me is having women friends and girlfriends and people I could emote with constantly, because I was just an emotional creature my whole life. And I think when you're not allowed that, I was once in Kosovo, and I'll never forget this, and I had gone with friends after the war whose house had been destroyed, and I went to help them clean their house, and we were going around, and we were finding people in the communities who needed mattresses and help, and all the roads were full of landmines. It was really crazy, and we went into this backyard, and we found this mother and her daughter, and their house was all graffitied, and they were living in the backyard, and they were sleeping on the ground, and the mother was really concerned because her 2 sons had not returned for 2 years. And we came back the next day and we bought the mattresses. And 5 minutes before we had arrived, her son had come home. And I heard in the backyard this huge commotion. Everyone was crying and screaming, and it was just like this it was wild. And I walked into the yard, and for some reason he saw me, and because America had helped Kosovo, I don't know what it was, he was like, oh my God. And he threw himself on me, and he started to wail. I mean, wail. Just like, ah. And I had two thoughts. This was many, many years ago. Oh my God, there is a man, and he's wailing on me. And oh my God, there's a man, and he's wailing on me. And they were very conflicted. And I realized in that moment that me, feminist Eve, was having issues with a big man wailing on me, right? That even built into my DNA was, oh, men don't do that. Men are strong, men are this, men are that. And in that moment I went, oh, I get this. As this man was in my arms, weeping and weeping, I went, oh, bullets are hardened tears. That's what they are. They're hardened tears. They're the tears that didn't get to happen, right? And I really think if we really allowed men to begin to release the pain that's inside them, there will be a tsunami of feelings that begins to start to tumble out. And that will be the beginning of our liberation. I really believe that.
Yeah. That's an incredible story. That's an incredible story. Well, that takes us to I got to as many questions as I could, you guys, to our last reading, because ultimately, spoiler alert, there is an apology in the book. And we're going to hear it. So reading 6, please.
Eve, let me say these words. I am sorry. I am sorry. Let me sit here at the final hour. Let me get it right this time. Let me be staggered by your tenderness. Let me risk fragility. Let me be rendered vulnerable. Let me be lost. Let me be still. Let me not occupy or oppress. Let me not conquer or destroy. Let me bathe in the rapture. Let me be the father. Let me be the father who mirrors your kind-heartedness back to you. Let me lay no claims. Let me bear witness and not invade. Eve, I free you from the covenant. I revoke the lie. I lift the curse. Old man, be gone.
Thank you. Thank you, Lauren, for the beautiful, beautiful raisins. Really.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just saw him
Thank
whooshing
all
out
of
the door.
you so much.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to hug now.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.
I'm Lauren Schiller. This is Eve Ensler. Eve will be signing
you.
books in the lobby. They've got books available for sale as well. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.